Hey everyone, welcome back to our taboo busting alphabetical journey. Today we're going to talk about L for limiting beliefs. Now, this is a huge topic, and if you've ever listened to people like Tony Robbins talk on stage, they do a lot of talking about this topic in particular. And you may have heard people recently talking even more about things like imposter syndrome, which really, in my opinion, ties into this quite largely, really. And interestingly enough, in order to segue into the main sort of meat of the show today, I'd love to mention the fact that my lovely co-host Sylvia actually talks about this quite a lot in her work. So, Sylvia, I'd like to tee you up there to not only welcome you in, but also to tell us a little bit about what you talk about in terms of limiting beliefs and why you do it that way.
Thank you, John Thor. Always great to talk with you. And I'm so delighted to have this chance to talk about this topic with our communities and those in our networks, because it was one of the biggest roadblocks that I had that I didn't even know about to my own growth, to my transformation, to just a more joyful life. So why I talk about it so much in my work is because I had to learn it myself, become aware of it, and then to move on from it. So what I love to offer our audience members today is really that awareness of what is even a limiting belief. Because like we talked about before, it's, the qualifier of limiting, or the adjective limiting, it's gratuitous until someone tells you, because otherwise it's just a belief that you have, right? It's just is the way of life. And then more importantly, the awareness has to lead to some sort of meaningful action to move away from these beliefs that are limiting our growth and our joy and our success. So I want to showcase perhaps a couple tactics and tips and tricks that I've used to help not only myself but others around me to move away from these very limiting ideas and beliefs.
Absolutely, and I think one of my favorite parts of what you said is the idea that until you realize something is a limiting belief, it is just a belief.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those really interesting things where a lot of people go their entire lives without certain beliefs being challenged. And it's one of the really interesting things about even things like the internet and shows like this one where someone might come across this and suddenly something clicks. There's a light bulb moment
Mm-hmm.
because for the first time they've been forced to see things from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I've had those moments where um, everything ranging from small and not really life changing, but eye opening, over to literally life changing epiphanies about the way things are.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to you about a fair few of these in the recent years where sometimes it's the smallest trigger that just causes a train of thought to take you to realize that you've always done something a specific way, or you've always thought of something a specific way
Yeah.
because you've been allowed to. And I don't mean no one's forbidden you, but you
Right.
haven't had to change it, right?
Yeah. Or I would say sometimes we tend to ignore those triggers, right? Or the challenges that those triggers are pointing out. So what's really fascinating is, we think about how our brains work and what it's supposed to do for us, right? Each of us has a brain that's there to keep us safe, and feeling correct and being right feels really good. And that's what our brains want us to do, right? It's to have that right positive feeling, that really just higher energy, and also to keep us safe, right? And when someone who might appear as a foe with a disagreement about your belief system or your actions as a result of those belief system, it stings, right? Like it really hurts. Like you're like, I don't want that anymore. Yet what I love what about what you said a moment ago is we actually have a lot of these little moments of uh potential awareness through triggers that can help us, if we do it right, to really assess whether this belief is limiting and whether it serves us any longer. So for instance, um, one of the limiting beliefs that I didn't even know I had, yet was always present, was this idea that no one would care about what I had to say, either on stage or in my writing. Now, you could say that's a self-confidence issue, that's maybe a skill issue, maybe that's my inability to take criticism. Maybe all the above, right? Or some of the above. Yet it goes back to some sort of limiting belief about who I am and what I'm supposed to be. And what was interesting was I really had the awareness actually, or the potential for awareness was always there, because I would always feel this angst or this discomfort whenever someone would criticize my presence on stage or my writing. Yet I took that as, right, prophecy coming true, the proof that I am in fact not fit for the stage. I am in fact not fit to be an author, versus going like, is this really true, or could there be another possibility to my own story? And that, so someone called it out one day, right? So it really took somebody else going, why do you think that way? Like, they, instead of questioning just my behavior, right, or judging my behavior, they go, let's take a couple steps back and go, why do you even think that way? I go, what do you mean? They go, well, what you're telling yourself is a story. That's in your head, right? Or you took someone else's story and made it your own. And then the question after that was, whose story are you telling? Yet what was fascinating, as a result of that conversation and that awareness, was I started to spot then other limiting beliefs and stories I had based on the following criteria. One was that the limiting beliefs, again, until I was told that it was limiting, or it was highlighted it was limiting, I just thought it was a belief, right? Yet the limiting beliefs usually take on a hyperbolic sense, right? It's very drastic in that it's either no one will read my book, or it's always going to be like this, or it could never be like that. Those are really absolute statements, usually founded on maybe very little evidence or one piece of evidence. And so hyperbolic statements like that, as well as binary statements, like it's either bad or good, right? I might say something like, oh, that person is either great or not great, right? Or that they're either good or evil, or this is absolute perfect, or this is absolute trash, or I'm a success or I'm a failure. That binary dichotomous framework and the language around that was what helped me to start to go, wait a minute, like I literally had to catch myself in the moment as I said these things, or I started to notice, right, that's what I would journal on, or that's what would come out when I thought nobody was listening. And once I knew that, it was like, oh boy, there's a lot there. And there has been a lot of inner work done in this area that I've taken on. And yes, there is a person's voice behind a lot of these stories, yet to kind of, go back to what you said at the beginning of the intro, it is otherwise just life. Like, because, right, until somehow, some way, I'm able to find a different possibility, I will focus on making that thing my truth and fulfill the confirmation bias that is the way life is. And
Yeah,
including,
and I
right,
think
being on stage. Yeah.
yeah, and I think, to kind of return to a story that I think I shared within the anxiety episode, our very first one. I've spoken about mental health on stage quite a lot of times, and not often as the main topic, but it often ties into others. And I had someone come up to me after a talk where he asked me about a comment I made about intrusive thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And a while later, I got an email from him saying, I looked this up and realized that I've been suffering with this for my entire life, but I always just thought I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, that that person had been living with a limiting belief of that this wasn't something he could get help for. This was just something that would always hold him back.
Right.
And I think, to your point earlier, and I think that was a really important and interesting point to, I guess, return to and sort of revisit, which is this idea that the limiting beliefs in some way, whether misguided or not, are in a way our brain trying to protect us from something. we think we're protecting ourselves from judgment by, like you said, not publishing a book or not going on stage, because what if everyone laughs at us? You know, that he didn't want to tell anyone about what was going on in his head, because what if people just think he's crazy?
Hmm.
And those, like you said, it's when we go to those black and white areas, when we have this total binary of, it's not just that he might need some help because he's not as feeling as good as he could be.
Right.
No,
Right.
it's either he's crazy or he's sane.
Hmm.
And I've felt this in so many different ways. And you mentioned things like, you know, being a success or being a failure. Um, you can be both in different things, or you can be somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And like,
Or at different
um,
times
uh,
of your journey, right? You
yeah,
could win in one area at this juncture of your journey and then literally fall down in another the next day, and then rinse and repeat, right? Or right, pivot from there. Yeah, absolutely. It's not either or all the time, right? It's always the gray in between the different colors.
yeah. And one thing that's really helped me reframe those, and I love the way that you sort of positioned yours, and I think I've come at it from a similar mindset, but a slightly different methodology, where um, it's often down to doing a bit of a brain dump and then trying
Mhm.
to get an external perspective. So,
Yeah.
for example, one of the most just life-changing piece of advice that I've ever had was from my wife, when she told me, when I was sort of stuck in this idea of nothing that I ever did was good enough. And she just said, look, just try to write down completely matter of fact what you've done. And think, if someone else was telling you they had done these things, would you think they were, you know, pathetic? Would you think they weren't good enough? Or would you think they were pretty damn impressive?
Hmm.
And just wrapping my head around the idea that I didn't have to create any fancy story about some of the stuff that I've done, that, you know, just writing down facts, and I could go, actually, that's some really cool stuff, suddenly allowed me to feel, in a way, I guess, proud of what I'd done, without feeling like I was boasting, without feeling like it was just sort of bells and whistles and marketing.
Hmm. You touched on something really critical in my own journey of learning about limiting beliefs and overcoming them, or at least pivoting away from them when I noticed them in my own mind, which is that behind every limiting belief is a fear. And what's interesting is our brains like to amplify that fear to keep us safe, right? So in a way, what you just said a moment ago, why are you telling yourself, and I'm just saying this, right, as I think through it, right? Why would someone like you be telling yourself like nothing you would do or could do or did matter, when I know that's not the truth, right? And yet there's a fear behind that of some kind that you have, right? Be it lack of acceptance or rejection, or inadequate fear of inadequacy, or something, right? And I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah, I know I've struggled with a similar thing of, well, gosh, does what I do matter? And it really is a fear of not being accepted or good enough, right? That really is my fear. And my brain in this case, likes to amplify that to be like, okay, like it that's danger. Not being accepted could literally mean you could be not fed, not safe, right? Whatever, fill in the blank, right? All these things that we magnify in our own minds. Yet the more we keep that to ourselves, right? So I like what you said about talking to your wife in this case about this, voicing it out, shining a light on it, and for someone to almost go, respectfully and lovingly go, is that really true? Or
Mm.
could there be another alternative here? And what they're doing is actually shining a light on the fear, um, so that you can see, actually, that is an over-indexed fear that I am placing too much emphasis on, or the possibility of that thing coming true is exaggerated, which goes back to the hyperbole that I talked about earlier. In the way that we talk about that fear comes out as a limiting belief or story about the limiting belief. And when there's a hyperbole in the belief, your language would be hyperbolic, right? So there's kind of a 1-to-1 ratio there in terms of how that gets expressed. And I like your paradigm of how to overcome it, because I think it's really similar to mine in that I often will need someone to challenge me to go, what other options could there be to your version of the story? So let's honor that your story could very well be true, yet there could be 7 billion other possibilities here, right? But let's just name 5 more. We don't have to go to 7 point whatever billion. Let's start with just 6, half a dozen. So your story is, no one will ever read your book, buy your book. Okay, fair. That could happen. What else?
Yeah.
What else is there? Could someone possibly buy your book and hate it? Yeah. Okay, so then we got story number 2. Story number 3, could someone buy it and think this is the best thing ever? Possibly, yeah. Story number 3. Story number 4, someone may, read half of it and throw it in the trash. That's a possibility to do, but they did buy it, right? And then story number 5 could be, they read 3 sentences and it was the best 3 sentences ever. Okay, fair. And I'm not even to 6 yet, and I'm already going like, oh, okay, this is not as magnified or hyperbolic of a fear, or that like the fear might still be there, but all of a sudden I'm going like, wait a minute, like, yeah, like my version of the story is like this tiny
Yeah.
in the whole scheme of things.
And I think, it's also, and this feels like something we say in almost every episode that has anything to do with mental health, but it's also about finding, what version of this works for you.
Yes.
Because, like, I know, I remember listening to the speaker talk about, positive affirmations and incantations, and he talked about like running down the beach while saying out loud his own name, and that he was the best in the world, and like that is not something that I see myself doing. Like
That is not on brand.
But on the flip side, like I was talking to one of my best friends the other day, and she has a lot of like limiting beliefs and struggles with the sort of self-worth, and we sort of have each other's back in that, which is always good. And I got this just absolutely beautiful message from her, just randomly saying that she would regularly go back and read messages that I'd sent to her when she'd feel down. And it just meant the world to read that, because it made me think about how I've done the same throughout time. Like messages and cards from my wife. I've got a stack of like every birthday and Christmas and Valentine's cards from my wife, and this friend of mine as well. Like I go back and read messages from her that make me feel like, make me feel that self-worth and everything. And it was funny because we were talking about how it almost feels like if it's in writing, it's somehow more legitimate. And we were joking about how our brains were really sort of contractually minded, because someone can say whatever, but if they put it in writing, they must mean it, and there's no logic in it. But it, for whatever reason, for some people that works. For some people, they need to hear it said. So I think it's important that we figure out that whatever works for us in that way is valid, whether it is conversational, whether it's writing everything down, whether it's putting it in an Excel document. Don't care. Like if you need to read that Alan Rickman didn't have a successful movie career until in his 40s, cool, go for it. You've still got time.
Yeah, exactly. Or print his photo out, put it in, right?
Yeah.
On your vanity mirror, whatever you need to inspire you. Well, what you touch on is so important, because there is that bespoke methodology, right? That you got to choose what's right for you. I'll also say there's also another choice for people here to consider, is whether you want to address these limiting beliefs or disbeliefs, right? There are people who, even in my own family, who don't want to be aware or want to have acknowledged that their beliefs are limiting, right? They literally want to be told that they're spot on, they're right on, keep going, be you, do you. So, okay, right? Yet there's a reason why they're called limiting beliefs, is because they limit the possibility for additional growth, additional joy, additional success. In a way, it's a balancing act, right? Like some of these people go, well, that additional joy is probably not worth the risk. I'd rather just stay limited, you know. So in my mother's case, she really believes that, you know, people who are not from her background would not do her good. Okay, well, all right. I mean, I think she's missing out. Yet in her mind, it's better just to be with her own kind and not have to worry about the potential danger of somebody who is less similar to her, you know, making fun of her, saying mean words, and being hurtful. Okay. Um, and for any of us to challenge that, and challenge that belief, or ask her to move forward without her desire for that change, is meaningless. So I would say, you know, another thing to think about is, I mean, there are those of us, you know, who have people close to us who unfortunately choose to stick with it. Right? They even double down in some cases on, that's what I know, that's what I believe in, it's gotten me this far, so I'm gonna keep doing that. And without that, you know, not only that awareness, but without that desire for change, it becomes almost an exercise in, you know, right fighting. That's what my coach Kevin would say, right? That's just right fighting at that point, and
Yeah,
not
and
very helpful. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's a great place to actually start wrapping up, because I think um, it needs to come from within.
Hmm.
We need to want that, because at the end of the day, you're right. Some people find a lot of freedom in limitation, and
Hmm.
limitation doesn't have to be a bad thing. I once read a great literal essay on the freedom of limitation in creativity, and how a lot of people, when they have a blank canvas in front of them, they'd rather do nothing than start, because they feel like starting will
Hmm.
limit them.
Hmm.
Whereas other people will embrace that limitation.
Right.
And a lot of incredibly successful people have been driven by their limitation in order to do amazing things.
True.
And really trying to push someone into doing anything else and facing those limiting beliefs and trying to make them, well, unlimited, I guess,
Right.
um, is, if they don't want that, that is a form of something that we're going to talk about next week, which is M for manipulation. You know, it must come from ourselves, and we must be willing to face those, because like you said, it is tough, it is a lot of work, and it needs to come at the right time, because you don't want to push someone into facing more than they can handle, because they'll just shut down like a clam.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I love the way you framed it as, right, we want to, if we want to help, right, we have to do it in such a way that is of service and frankly consumable for the other person. Like they have to be able to digest it, and if we force it down their throats, it actually backfires and might, in a weird way, fulfill their prophecy, right, about certain things about people in general, and certainly about maybe the people who care enough to go challenge their beliefs. So yeah, absolutely spot on there.
Sure. Well, I guess we'll leave it there, and return next week for M for manipulation, and talk about some manipulating.